Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story.
Story number 1. By the time the fog rolled in, the interstate had already narrowed into a kind of dream. It was past midnight in the high plains, that strange hour when the world felt both too empty and too full. The only light came from the twin cones of the Peterbilt's headlights and the distant pinpricks of the stars, hidden now and then by the slow drift of passing clouds. Cal sat high in the cab, hands loose on the wheel, the steady murmur of the engine filling the small space around him. The dashboard glowed with a muted constellation of greens and ambers. The digital clock read 12:37. A lukewarm thermos of coffee sat in the cup holder, half empty, its faint burnt smell mixing with diesel and the ghost of pine-scented air freshener. The interstate stretched ahead like a ribbon laid over nothing. No towns for 40 miles in either direction, no rest areas worth speaking of. Just wide, open land on all sides, swallowed by darkness. Cal had been hauling across this route for 14 years, enough to memorize the subtle dips and curves by the sway of his trailer. He knew where the crosswinds tried to shove the rig off the shoulder, where the pavement cracked into tar-filled veins, where deer eyes would glow like tiny lanterns at the tree line. Tonight felt different, though, not because of anything dramatic. It was something smaller, quieter. A silence between songs on the radio that seemed to hang just a little too long. The sense that the night outside the glass wasn't empty so much as it was waiting. He nudged the volume knob on the radio, flipping past country stations and talk shows until he hit the familiar hum of late-night trucker chatter. Voices flickered in, thin and distant, warped by static. Out past KSHHH, mile marker to save, KSHHH. Anyone else seeing this? Fog like milk out here, boys. You keep it between. KSHHH. Cal frowned. Fog. The sky over his windshield still showed a scattered spray of stars. The air, last time he checked the side mirror, was clear enough to make out the scar of the highway behind him. But it was late autumn, and this stretch of interstate crossed low ground where the land sank into hidden gullies and shallow rivers. Ground fog could come up fast. He lifted his travel mug, the coffee bitter on his tongue, and watched the mile markers tick past. 212, 213, 214. White posts briefly illuminated, then gone in a blink. The fog began as a faint smudge at the edge of the light, a blurred halo where the beams met the dark. At first he thought it was exhaust from another vehicle up ahead, but there were no distant taillights, no red glow to anchor the haze. Just a soft, low-lying whiteness that seemed to gather itself out of nothing. He eased his foot off the accelerator. No need for sudden surprises at 65 with a full load. The engine note dropped, the hum of the tires grew more pronounced, and the fog stepped forward to meet him. In moments it was everywhere. It wasn't the thin, drifting mist he expected. It was dense and oddly even, as if someone had drawn a curtain across the world. The edges of the road vanished into a blank, pale field, the shoulder dissolving into a luminous gray that swallowed the land within 10 feet of the asphalt. The windshield showed a tunnel now, a short, featureless cylinder of visibility bounded by moving walls of vapor. The yellow center line shot underneath, steady and bright, the only thread connecting him to the idea of a road. Cal turned down the radio a notch, the static-shredded voices fading into soft background noise. The cab filled instead with the quiet hiss of rubber on wet pavement, except the road wasn't wet. The fog seemed to mute sound, to tuck it away and hold it close. He checked the clock again, 12:51 a.m. The next mile marker slid by, half hidden by white, 221. He blinked. He was sure the last one he'd seen had been 214. He hadn't felt like he'd gone 7 miles, but that was how it was sometimes on the road at night. Time compressed and stretched in little unseen ways, bent around songs and stray thoughts and the hypnotic flicker of passing lines. He checked his mirrors. The trailer lights glowed warmly, halos caught in the fog. No one behind, no one ahead. Just the engine, the road, and the dense, steady whiteness pressing in from both sides. The CB crackled again. "Anyone else out here? Anyone? KSHHH. Watch for 241. The voice was thin, genderless in the distortion, almost swallowed by the interference. It sent a small curl of unease along his arms. He tapped the mic, hesitated a second, then let it fall back into its cradle. No reason to clutter up the airwaves if his reception was this spotty. Probably chatter from 100 miles off, bouncing weird in the atmosphere. Couldn't help, couldn't do much. Just keep it between the lines. The fog thickened. It wasn't a sudden change. It happened the way frost creeps over glass, a slow, persistent layering. The far edge of his vision drew closer until he seemed to be driving inside a glowing cocoon. The light from his headlights didn't so much illuminate the fog as get swallowed by it, the beams fatting into a soft nothing a dozen feet ahead. He dropped his speed again, watching the needle settle just under 50. His shoulders tightened, then he forced them to relax. This was fine. He'd driven through worse. Ice storms, blinding rain, high winds that rocked the truck like a ship on rough water. Fog was just quiet. Still, something about this felt off. The mile markers kept coming. 228, 229, 230. They appeared abruptly out of the gloom, ghostly white slats, then vanished before he could fully register them. The sameness of the fog, the soft hum of the engine, the rhythmic flash of the markers began to create a strange, lulling effect. He reached for the coffee and realized with a faint prickle that his hand was trembling. Not from fatigue. He knew the feel of that well enough. This was something else. Like standing on a balcony and realizing the railing might not be quite as solid as it looked. The radio cut to pure static for a moment, a rushing hiss like wind through bare branches. It smoothed out into a low hum, then a voice slipped through, barely there. "You're back again." He turned the knob, trying to find the station it had come from, but there was nothing, just layers of faint, blurred sounds, none strong enough to latch onto. The voice had been soft, almost conversational, familiar in a way he couldn't place. The clock read 1:13 a.m. He frowned. It felt like only minutes since he'd looked at it last, and it had read 12:51. He glanced down at the odometer. The numbers had ticked up, certainly, but not enough to match that half-hour jump. Maybe the clock had reset when he wasn't paying attention. Maybe he was more tired than he thought. The fog rolled and breathed around the cab, the world outside reduced to a moving wall of pale opacity. He flicked off his high beams for a moment to see if it helped, and the tunnel of vision shrank, the white pressing in closer, more intimate. Low beams back on. The tunnel widened a fraction. It didn't make much difference. Minutes bled into each other. The monotony took on a strange, heavy texture. At mile marker 236, he saw the first sign of something alive in the world. The vague shape of a vehicle on the shoulder, a darker smudge in the fog, emergency flashers winking faint orange. Relief pricked through the tension. Another truck, maybe. Someone else dealing with this unavoidable, unnatural quiet. As he drew closer, the shape clarified into a pickup, old, boxy, its paint color indecipherable in the gray. The hazard lights blinked in slow, steady rhythm. There was no one standing outside, no movement behind the misted windows. He checked his mirrors, eased into the left lane to give it space, and craned his neck slightly as he passed. For a brief second, the interior lit up clearly. The cab was empty. No driver slumped over the wheel, no figure in the passenger seat. Just a few indistinct shapes on the bench, maybe a coat, a grocery bag, a pair of sunglasses glinting darkly on the dash. Then it was gone, swallowed back into the fog behind him. He frowned, unease deepening. It wasn't unheard of for a driver to abandon a vehicle to go seek help on foot, but in the kind of fog that could make 100 feet feel like 100 miles. The CB hissed. Left it again, just like before. The voice was a whisper, nearly lost. Cal's fingers tightened on the wheel. He looked at the radio and then back at the road, jaw working. He didn't like the way the words slid under his skin. Before he could decide whether to respond, the next mile marker appeared, 236. He blinked hard. He must have misread the last one. Easy to do with the numbers half obscured, the mind running on autopilot. Still, something about the clean, black 236 felt familiar. The way the bottom of the sign leaned just slightly inland, the small scrape of missing paint on its right edge. Details a person didn't usually notice until they knew them. 3 minutes later, the shape of a vehicle emerged from the fog ahead. Same angle, same slow blink of hazard lights. As he moved over to pass, the headlights traced the same old pickup, same blank windows, same empty cab. When his beams swept across the windshield, the interior flared into view, and for a breathless instant he could have sworn he saw his own reflection in the driver's seat, hands on a wheel that wasn't his. He was past it before he could be sure he hadn't imagined it. His heart rate ticked up. He ran his tongue over dry lips. The next marker, 236. He watched it approach, watched it pass, every second stretched thin and long. The road hummed beneath him, unbroken and smooth. The fog remained unchanging. The clock read 1:29 a.m. The CB crackled once more. "Cal," a voice said, clearly this time. Calm, familiar in a way that made his skin go cold. "You missed it again." He couldn't remember giving his handle in the last 2 hours. He couldn't remember hearing that voice on the radio before. The steering wheel felt a fraction heavier in his hands. He cleared his throat, his own voice sounding small in the cab. "Breaker, 19, who's calling?" Static answered. Then, faint under it, something like a chuckle. Not mocking, more like the weary amusement of someone watching a child try the same thing over and over, certain this time would be different. Outside, the fog billowed, indifferent. The odometer ticked upward quietly. By his calculations, he should have been well past mile 241 by now. He should have been halfway to the next rest area, thinking about lukewarm coffee from a vending machine and the feel of solid pavement under his boots. There was no change, no sign, no exit, just 236 again and again on its white post like a piece of scenery in a looping film reel. His breathing grew shallow. He forced himself to inhale deeply, to focus on the tactility of the wheel beneath his palms, the familiar shape of the shifter, the small creaks and rattles of the cab. Real things, honest things. The truck was moving. The fuel gauge dropped in tiny, predictable increments. The engine temperature held steady. Every instrument told him the same story: forward motion, time passing. Only the world outside refused to agree. "Slow down," the voice on the CB murmured. Close now. Not in his ears, not exactly, but in the space around his heart. "You always miss it when you're going too fast." He eased off the accelerator almost without meaning to. The truck responded obediently, the speedometer sliding down to 45, then 40, then 38. The engine tone dropped into a low, comforting rumble. The fog pressed closer, thicker, soft as cotton. Up ahead, the familiar shadow of the pickup waited on the shoulder. This time, as he approached, the hazard lights were dark. The truck sat in absolute stillness, its edges softened by the mist. The windshield reflected nothing but a bright smear of his own headlights, erasing any view of the interior. He passed it at 30 miles an hour, eyes locked on the road, but feeling its presence in the corner of his vision like a person standing just behind him in a dim room. The mile marker that followed was not 236. It was 237. The sight of that simple, sequential number loosed a muscle deep in his chest he hadn't realized was clenched. He let out a breath that shuddered a little on the way out. The clock read 1:31 a.m. The CB stayed quiet, an empty black square in its slot. The fog began to thin. It happened as gradually as it had come, the blank walls rolling back inch by inch. The beams of his headlights reached a little farther, touching the vague shapes of fence posts, a rising hint of hill to his right, the darker smudge of trees in the distance. Another marker, 238. Stars blinked back into view above. The sky returned, a deep, velvety bowl stretching over the world. The whiteness retreated into low folds along the ditch and in hollows of the land, no longer a total curtain but a series of scattered patches. By 1:45 a.m., the night was clear. The radio found a station on its own, a slow blues song threading into the cab, soft and unassuming. Cal's hands had stopped trembling. His heartbeat settled, syncing with the steady thrum of the engine. Behind him, somewhere in that stretch of highway now invisible in his mirrors, mile marker 236 stood where it always had, unremarkable, just another white post in a long, long line. Weeks later, he would check his logbook and see that the entire exchange, the thickening fog, the looping mile markers, the strange voice, had taken no more than 45 minutes. His trip times would add up. His fuel usage would match. There was no gap for anything impossible to hide in. Yet when he spoke carefully to a few other drivers in truck stop diners along that route, they would shift in their seats, glance at the door, and mention, casually, reluctantly, a certain run of fog around the 230-mile mark, a place where the world felt just slightly misaligned, as if the road there had a memory of its own. Some remembered a pickup on the shoulder, others a missing exit that should have been there and wasn't. A few, quietly, would mention a voice on the CB that knew their name without asking. No one had ever stopped to knock on the pickup's window. No one was sure, afterward, exactly how much time they had spent in the fog, or how many times they had passed that innocuous white 236, standing in the mist. The highway department swore there was nothing unusual in that section. The mile markers were where they had always been. The stretch between 235 and 241 measured out to the inch. On clear autumn days, under full daylight, it looked like any other piece of interstate. Open, harmless, ordinary. The kind of place a person's mind would glide over without catching. But on some nights, when the ground chilled fast and the air above stayed warm, when the fog began to rise in slow, pale breaths, long-haul drivers felt a soft, familiar prickling at the backs of their necks as they watched the numbers pass by. And somewhere just past midnight, when the radio fell quiet and the stars vanished behind a rolling wall of white, there were those who swore, if the cab was still enough and the engines hummed just right, they could hear a gentle voice at the edge of the static, saying, with something like patience, "You missed it again. Slow down, look closer this time." Story number 2. The mountain road had a way of folding the sky down close, so that the stars felt nearer than the valley floor. On clear nights, truck cabs climbed through constellations. On foggy ones, they slipped into something like a pocket between worlds. Lena was used to both. Her rig crawled steadily up the grade, headlights pushing through a patchy, swirling mist that had started as a suggestion on the horizon and grown into a low, moving wall. The outside temperature hovered just above freezing, cold enough for her to feel it in the steering wheel, in the stiffness of the rubber, in the way the air seeped in around the seals of the door. It was past 1 in the morning. The dash clock read 1:07. The radio was turned low, a late-night station murmuring old soft rock through the cab. Her thermos sat wedged in the cup holder, the coffee inside gone. Lukewarm and a little metallic, but still welcome. The faint bitter scent threaded through the small space, mixing with the hum of electronics, the faint plastic tang of the dashboard, the old leather and denim and dust. Outside, the mountain rose and fell in invisible folds. Guardrails emerged from the fog, gleaming silver for a heartbeat, then vanished again. The yellow line curved under her, a single unbroken brushstroke guiding her up toward the pass. She'd driven this route countless times. The Summit Ridge Pass was famously moody, clear as glass one night, snarled with snow and ice the next, fogged in without warning when warm valley air met the stubborn chill of higher ground. The dispatcher's voice had been firm. Make it through tonight if she could, drop the load in the morning, and take a long break on the other side. She checked the weather twice. No storms, just areas of dense fog. Lena rolled her shoulders under her flannel shirt, listened to the engine pull, felt the subtle tug of the grade. The fog thickened another notch, turning the road ahead into a pale, wavering tunnel. The trees, when she glimpsed them, were little more than suggestions, dark trunks, pale brush, a smear of needled shadow. The GPS on the dash pulsed with its bright, artificial certainty. A blue line climbed an abstract contour. An icon of a tiny truck crawled along it, confident and oblivious to the fact that the world outside had become soft and indistinct. A faint chime sounded, and a small triangle appeared on the screen. "Traffic alert," the metallic voice announced. "Road closure ahead, rerouting." Lena frowned, her brow furrowed in the dim glow. There were no closure signs, no warnings on the CB, no mention in the weather bulletins. She reached out with one gloved hand and tapped the screen. The image zoomed out, showing the pass ahead marked in bright red and a pale, thin line curling off to the right, an alternate route. "Service road," she muttered under her breath. She knew about a few old alignments of the highway through these mountains, bypassed years ago by straighter and safer lanes. Some still existed as frontage roads or access routes for maintenance crews. Others had crumbled back into the hillside, reclaimed by trees and time. The GPS label hovered over the detour, Summit Ridge Way Station and Service. That snagged at something in her memory. The name was familiar in the way of overheard conversations in truck stop booths, late-night forum threads, passing mentions. Summit Ridge, old station. Creepy but harmless, someone had written once. Feels like stepping into a different decade. Coffee's terrible. She had never found it. She looked a couple of times out of idle curiosity, but the highway had led straight past blank rock faces and dense conifers. No turnoff, no lit sign. The next green overhead marker emerged from the fog and hung there for a second, ghost-like. Summit Ridge past 6 miles. No SCRVICES next 32 miles. The GPS chimed again, more insistent now. Take exit on right in 0.5 miles. Lena's hand slid from the wheel to the CB mic and back again. No one was talking, just a faint bed of static like distant rain on a metal roof. She glanced at the fuel gauge. Plenty left. She wasn't tired enough to need a stop. The main road should have been fine. Yet something about the fog ahead, about its odd uniformity and depth, made a small instinctive part of her wary. It didn't drift and break the way valley fog usually did. It held solid, as if the pass above had been filled with milk. The sense of there being a pocket of night in front of her, different from the one she was in now, pressed gently but insistently at the back of her mind. The road sign appeared on the right. A small, old-fashioned board on 2 posts, its reflective letters catching her lights. Summit Ridgeway Station, 14 mile. Trucks only. She blinked. The sign looked older than the bright green interstate markers, its paint a little chipped at the edges, the font slightly narrow and tall, like the ones from pictures in trucking history books. The GPS chimed one more time. Take exit on right. The ramp came out of the fog abruptly, a short break in the guardrail, a sloping lane leading down into a thicker, pearly soup. She flipped on her turn signal, the rhythmic tick filling the cab, and eased the wheel to the right. The tires rumbled over the ridged warning strip, then smoothed out on the exit pavement. The slope dipped gently, the grade easing as she descended. The main highway disappeared behind her, swallowed by white. For a few seconds, the world narrowed to the sound of her own truck and the wet whisper of fog brushing the mirrors. Then another sign rose up on the right, closer this time, glowing in her beams. Way station open, all commercial vehicles must enter. The arrow pointed straight ahead. Lena's breath collected faintly on the inside of the glass, a soft ghost in each exhale. She turned off the radio, letting the music die away. Silence settled into the cab, deep and plush, broken only by the low drone of the engine and the occasional squeak of the seat as she shifted. The first lights appeared as a gloomy halo in the distance. Sodium lamps by the color, warm and slightly orange, diffused by the fog into floating globes. As she crept closer, details gathered around them, like a photograph developing in slow motion. A wide concrete apron, a single-lane scale pad lined with reflective tape, a low building with a flat roof and a long band of windows. The windows glowed softly from within. The air over the station seemed a little thinner, the fog curling around the lights but not quite entering the pools of brightness. Lena rolled down her window an inch. Cold air slipped in, edged with the faint smells of wet pavement, old diesel, and something else. Coffee, maybe, though it had a slightly stale, overcooked note, as if it had been sitting on a hot plate for hours. She followed the painted arrows, the tires ticking gently over textured concrete, and brought the truck to a slow crawl across the scale pad. A dull thump sounded as the rig's full weight settled. Somewhere unseen, mechanisms hummed awake, a faint vibration beneath the floor. Overhead, a rectangular sign flickered on, "Please stop." A smaller light beneath it cycled, weighing in progress. Lena came to a halt. The engine idled in low, patient breaths. The fog slid along the edges of the station yard, unable or unwilling to cross the invisible boundary where the light fizzled it into nothing. She glanced toward the building. The band of windows along its front was lightly fogged from the inside. Shadows moved there, slow, indistinct shapes passing behind the glass, bending and blurring the light. An old analog clock on the wall was visible between two panes, its face yellowed against the cream paint. Its hands pointed to 1:14. The second hand did not move. A small intercom speaker, the kind with a metal grill and a push-to-talk button, protruded from a stand beside her window. A red light above the button glowed steadily. Lena cleared her throat, suddenly conscious of her own breathing in the cold air. "Summit Ridge Station, evening," she said, voice slightly higher than normal. "Truck number A73 westbound, full load." The speaker crackled softly. A faint hiss poured out, as if the device were remembering how to have a voice. "Proceed," a tone said at last, genderless, flat. It sounded like a recording dragged through layers of age, just a bit too slow, just a touch warped at the edges. "Proceed when light turns green." She watched the overhead sign, "Please stop," blinked off. A moment later, the green GO light hummed to life. She eased the truck forward. The scale pad thunked again as the weight shifted off. The small printer on the stand beside the intercom spat out a narrow ribbon of paper with a soft mechanical cough, the sound quaintly analog in an age of glowing screens. Lena took it, the paper warm and slightly rough between her fingers. She held it up to the dash lights. Gross weight, 79,840 lb. Truck ID, A73. Direction westbound. Way station, Summit Ridge. Date 10/23/83. Time 1:14 a.m. The numbers were crisp, the ink dark with a faint bluish sheen. There was no smear, no fatting, no sign that this ticket had been printed decades ago. It might have just come out of a modern office machine, for all its clarity. She read the date again, then a third time. Her own reflection looked back at her from the windshield, faint and serious. Outside, beyond her own face, the glow of the station hovered like an island in a pale, shifting sea. Wind, or something like it, brushed gently against the side of the cab. The fog along the perimeter shifted and curled, moving as if in response to a breath. In the building, behind the long windows, a shape paused. It might have been a person standing still, just beyond recognition, shoulders angled slightly toward the yard. The feeling of being observed drifted across Lena's mind, not hostile, not warm, simply there. The intercom crackled again. "Driver lounge and restrooms available inside," the voice said. Still that same not-quite-human cadence, like tape played through a tired machine. "Parking ahead. Maximum rest period." The end of the sentence dissolved into a hiss. The idea of stepping into the building sent a small ripple of unease along her spine. Not outright fear, more a sense of entering a photograph, or a memory that did not belong to her. Of pushing open a door and finding time arranged differently on the other side. She pulled forward into the lot instead, following the faded stripes to a line of truck parking spaces. A few appeared already occupied, dark hulks outlined in the sodium glow. Trailers with sides that bore logos Lena didn't recognize, painted in fonts and color schemes that looked several styles out of date. One had a slogan she dimly associated with a company that no longer existed, absorbed years ago into a larger name. No engines idled among them. No interior cab lights glowed. They sat very still, as if they had been parked for a very long time. She slipped her rig into an empty slot at the end of the row and set the brake. The hiss of air released into the stillness, loud and intimate, then died away. For a few minutes, she simply sat, hands loose in her lap, fingers resting on the textured fabric of her work pants. Her eyes wandered from the fog drifting beyond the light to the building and back again. The windows along the front showed that analog clock, still pinned at 1:14. No one moved inside now. The shadows had receded, or perhaps merged with the grain of the dim interior light. On the radio dial, without her touching it, a station slid into focus. A commercial jingle played, bright, bouncy, neatly rhymed. It advertised a brand of cigarettes she was fairly sure had been banned from broadcast long before she'd been born. The sound quality was oddly rich and tinny at the same time, echoing the way music did when played through old speakers in a tiled room. When the jingle ended, the announcer's voice came in, cheerful and a little too fast. "And remember, folks, start your engines right with a hot cup of Ridgway's Diner coffee, just off the westbound Summit Ridge exit. Open all night for hungry drivers crossing the clouds." Lena's hand moved automatically to the radio knob. She clicked the unit off. The voice vanished mid-sentence. The quiet that followed was strangely deep, as if the air had stuffed cotton into all its tiny cracks. She studied the way ticket again. The date remained what it had been, 10/23/83, her own truck ID, her direction, her current weight down to the pound. There were explanations, of course. A glitch, a me-set internal clock on ancient equipment, a technician who had never bothered to adjust the date. Stories circulated in the community about phantom dates and reverse digits on printouts, harmless little anomalies to be laughed about over coffee. Yet all the reasonable answers felt thin and flimsy here, in this patch of night that seemed halfway folded out of the world. The fog around the edges of the station yard pulsed very gently, as if stirred by a distant, slow heartbeat. She thought again about the forum posts, the murmured talk in booths, Summit Ridge, time slip, old trucks in the lot, a warm place to pause when the pass was too strange ahead. A protection, some said, a place that came when the mountain was in a certain mood, when the clouds sank too low and the roads forgot where they were supposed to lead. Her dispatcher would see nothing unusual in her timing if she lingered here for a little while. The log would show she'd crossed the pass later than planned, but still within safe limits. The miles would add up the way they should. She could turn off the engine, lean back, close her eyes. Let the weight of the cab cradle her. Let that odd, watchful stillness hold the truck like a hand on a child's shoulder. She imagined the interior of the building. Cracked linoleum, a humming vending machine with snacks in old wrappers, a coffee pot on its hot plate, half full and dark, a bulletin board with notices curling at the corners, a logbook on a counter filled with names in looping ballpoint script, dates that stepped oddly around the calendar. She did not need coffee. She did not need a restroom. She was not quite tired enough to justify stepping into that other kind of night. She set the ticket down on the dash, weighed it lightly with a pen, and rested her head against the back of the seat. She did not close her eyes entirely. The glow of the station lights rimmed her peripheral vision. Minutes passed without the usual sense of them passing. The engine's idle became a soft drone. Her breathing synced with it, in and out, slow and steady. At some point, the fog outside shifted minutely, and the air pressure in the cab seemed to change, like the faint drop felt when an elevator starts to move. When she finally glanced at the dash clock again, it read 1:27 a.m. The clock on the wall inside the station, seen through the window, still read 1:14. She started the truck, moving again with a feeling like surfacing. The shift from brake to accelerator felt heavier than usual, as if something gentle and invisible released its hold with reluctance. At the far end of the lot, the exit lane unfurled, curving upward through the fog. A sign waited at its mouth, to Highway 47 westbound. Watch for fog. Drive safely. The intercom didn't speak again as she passed. The radio remained silent, even when she turned it back on. The climb up the ramp was short. The fog at the top seemed thinner, stretched. A moment later, she was back on the main pass, the yellow line sliding under her in an endless, reassuring scroll. Behind her, when she glanced quickly in the mirror, the exit lane was gone. There was only dark rock and a thin barrier, then mist. By the time she reached the summit, the fog had broken into ragged patches. Stars pushed through overhead, hard and bright. The world below the guardrail fell away into a soft, blank ocean of cloud, unbroken and silver. She rolled down the other side toward the valley, the road unwinding ahead of her, the sense of oddness receding but never fully leaving. At the first modern rest area, an hour later, she pulled in for coffee that tasted disappointingly normal. On the bulletin board inside, among flyers for truck washes and mechanic services, someone had tacked up a faded photograph. It showed a way station at the edge of a clearing, half wreathed in fog. A row of older model trucks lined the lot. The sky above was a blank white. At the bottom, in scrawled handwriting, someone had labeled it, Summit Ridge, 1982, closed 1984. On her way back out to the lot, Lena checked the dash. The way ticket lay where she had left it, but the date had changed. It now read the current day. The ink was as crisp as before. The time remained 1:14 a.m. As she watched, a small crease formed along one edge of the paper, as if it had been folded once long ago and then smoothed. Nothing else happened. She sat in the quiet cab for another minute, the heater blowing faintly through the vents, the steering wheel cool under her fingers. Out on the highway, other trucks moved through their own patches of night, through clear stretches and fog. Banks and pockets of roadside light. Somewhere up in the mountains above, whether visible or not, there was a concrete pad and a low, flat-roofed building that sometimes appeared and sometimes didn't. A place where time, perhaps, lost its usual grip for a little while. A place that weighed not just steel and cargo, but the quiet, unnoticed hours between departure and arrival. Lena folded the ticket once, along the new crease, and tucked it into the small compartment with her other paperwork. She could have thrown it away, left it there among the truck stop trash, but something about the weight of it, out of proportion to its size, made her keep it. The next time she crossed Summit Ridge on a night thick with fog, she would glance at her GPS out of habit, listening for that soft chime. Whether the alternate route appeared again or not, she couldn't say. Some drivers said the station only called to those who needed it, to those climbing into a particular kind of fog, inside as much as outside, to those for whom the night had become too seamless, too straight, carrying them forward with no place to rest between here and there. And every now and then, when the road curved around the mountains just so and the clouds settled low in the passes, a light would appear on the hillside. A band of windows, a flat roof, an analog clock forever on the verge of moving. Story number 3. On some stretches of interstate, the night came down like a blanket. On others, it behaved more like a slow, curious animal, creeping in over the fields and across the asphalt by degrees. On that particular night, on that particular run, the fog came in like that, crawling, testing, nosing its way into every gap it could find. Devin had been watching it build in his mirrors for the last hour. At first, it had been nothing more than low wisps over the dark fields, pale smears caught in the beam of a distant farmhouse light. It clung to the ditches, to the shallow depressions where water pooled. Then it lifted, climbing the air, gathering itself into layers. By the time the dashboard clock rolled from 1:09 to 1:10 a.m., the world beyond his windshield had become a soft, shifting tunnel of gray. He tipped his travel mug back for the last inch of coffee. It tasted tired, the way truck stop coffee always did after sitting in a metal thermos for too many hours, bitter with just a hint of cardboard. The warmth curled down his throat and spread through his chest, though he could still feel the creep of fatigue at the edges of his awareness. The dash lights washed the cab in gentle green. Gauges sat where they should. The engine hummed a familiar note beneath his feet. The big Freightliner's headlights carved a short, hazy cylinder ahead, the beams caught and scattered by the fog until they seemed to dissolve into nothing 10 truck lengths out. The interstate here was long and flat, cutting across a stretch of low, scrubby farmland with few distinctive marks. In daylight, it was a geography of small variations, slight rises, the occasional line of trees, a sagging barn leaning into the wind. At night, and especially in the fog, it became something else entirely. An endless, gently glittering ribbon, its shoulders lost in a pale sea. Devin knew this run. He'd taken it more times than he could comfortably count, east to west, west to east, crisscrossing the same counties until the mile markers felt like old neighbors. There was a rest area around mile 312 on this stretch, a small, practical affair with vending machines and a loop of grass out back. He'd planned to hit it, stretch his legs, use the restroom, then push on to the city lights far ahead. He checked the GPS out of habit. The little truck icon moved smoothly along the blue line. A small marker labeled Rest Area, 2MI hovered on the screen, right where he expected it. Out the windshield, the next green overhead sign rose out of the fog and slid past. Exit 309, County Road 4/VANDER. No mention of services, no glow of gas station lights, just more pale darkness, more fields. The CB gave a half-hearted crackle. Static shivered in the speaker, then died. The late-night chatter had thinned hours ago. Either the other drivers were ahead of him, behind him, or running silent through their own private tunnels of fog and thought. He rubbed at the back of his neck and rolled his shoulders, trying to chase away the stiffness. The world outside had been nothing but fog and the swoop of white lines for too long. Time, in these conditions, had a way of loosening, of slipping its usual gear. Mile marker 310 appeared on the right, its white shape damp and ghostly. It flashed through his high beams and was gone. 2 more, he murmured, more to the hum of the cab than to himself. 2 more miles and then the familiar pull-off, the rectangle of light, the curve of asphalt, the squat brick building with its humming fluorescence. He could already imagine the feel of the cooler night air brushing his face, the sound of crickets somewhere beyond the lamps, the faint, far hiss of other trucks on the interstate. The GPS chimed softly. "Approaching rest area," the artificial voice said. "In 1 mile." Outside, the fog thickened. It was a subtle change, but Devon felt it as much as he saw it. The tunnel of visibility shortened by a few crucial feet. The light from his headlights came back at him a little harsher, refracted and softened at the same time, turning the road into a pale band against a softer pallor. He dropped his speed a notch, the rig gliding down from 65 to a comfortable 58. His tires hissed quietly on the dampened asphalt. The faint hum of vibration through the wheel felt like the purr of some mechanical animal, content and steady. Another sign should have been coming up, blue with the familiar icons: rest area, picnic table, gas. The ghost of it lived in his muscle memory. Instead, a different sign materialized out of the fog, coated in a sheen of moisture that made it gleam oddly. Blue Hollow Rest Area, 1 mile. Next SCRVICES 64 miles. Devon blinked hard. The wipers gave a perfunctory squeak as he flicked them, more out of reflex than necessity. Blue Hollow. He searched his mind for the name, sifting through years of mileage and monotony. There was no Blue Hollow on this route. He was sure of it in the simple, grounded way a person is sure of the way from their own front door to the corner store. The GPS, however, seemed unconcerned. The little icon drew closer to the small marker still labeled Rest Area. When he zoomed in with a thumb tap, the display adjusted to show a familiar universal symbol: a bed, a picnic table, a restroom icon, but no name. The fog ahead glowed faintly, an indistinct bloom of light bending and diffusing through it. Somewhere in that gauzy brightness, lamps burned. He scanned the shoulders, the faint strips of grass beyond them. The highway here cut through nowhere. 64 miles without services was entirely possible, but Blue Hollow felt like something else, something that should have had a story attached. The next sign came quickly, looming up at the side of the road: Blue Hollow Rest Area 14 mile. Trucks okay. The exit arrow pointed to the right, its reflective paint a sharp, insistent white. He weighed the options in a single breath. Driving on meant 64 more miles through a fog that was getting thicker by the quarter mile. His eyes were beginning to prickle from strain. His thoughts had started to run in small, repetitive loops. Stopping, even just to splash cold water on his face and reset, made sense. Names changed. States refurbished rests, renamed them. Maybe this was new, slotted in where the old, unremarkable mile 312 spot had been. He flicked on his turn signal. The click-tick filled the cab like the slow heartbeat of something calm. The exit ramp slid under his wheels, curving gently down and away from the main line. The fog here thinned just enough to reveal the shape of the interchange. Grassy embankments silvered with dew, dark clumps of trees standing a little way off like patient onlookers. Then abruptly, the rest area opened before him. It was small, compact. Sodium vapor lamps stood sentry along the lots, casting their particular orange, slightly haunted glow. The fog, caught in their light, turned into floating halos that made every object look softly doubled. A central building sat back from the parking lanes, low and rectangular, with a long glass front and a roof that jutted out in a flat, confident plane. The architecture had a quiet, mid-century solidity to it: clean lines, brick and concrete, aluminum-framed windows. Not quite in step with the newer, more utilitarian rest stops he was used to. It looked like something from an old postcard. He steered into the truck parking area. The lot was more populated than he expected for this hour. A line of rigs hunched in the orange light, their silhouettes looming and still. He slowed, counting without meaning to. One with a faded green cab and a logo he dimly recognized from childhood. Another, all white, unmarked. A third, a long-nosed Peterbilt that looked a decade or two older than his own Freightliner but in good shape. Farther down, a box truck with a retro script on its side, something about fresh bread. No engines idled, No exhaust plumes curled from stacks, no glow leaked from sleepers. They sat like parked thoughts, waiting. Devon eased his own rig into a space near the end of the row and set the brake. The familiar hiss of released air was oddly loud in the quiet. When the engine settled into idle, it seemed almost rude against the hush that lay over the place. He killed it one switch at a time. Silence stepped in, broad and full. For a few seconds he sat without moving. His hands rested on his thighs, the fabric of his jeans stiff and cool under his fingers. He could hear the ticking of cooling metal somewhere under the hood, like a faint rain on distant glass. The fog swirled gently through the sodium light. Beyond the poles, the world fell quickly away into blankness. He opened the door. Cold air climbed into the cab, carrying the moist, mineral smell of damp pavement, cut grass, and something else under it, cleaner, fluorescent-lit air, the faint plastic and coffee scent of public spaces. His boots met the asphalt with a hollow sound. The lot stretched away on either side, the parked trucks looming like sleeping animals. Their windows reflected the orange lights, making it impossible to see in. A faint sheen of moisture coated their flanks. He closed the door behind him with a soft thump and paused, listening. No traffic noise from the interstate filtered in, though it couldn't have been more than a few hundred yards away. No hiss of an air compressor, no distant cough of a generator. Just the quiet hush of fog rolling over open ground. The rest area building's glass front glowed warmly. Inside, he could see rows of vending machines, a few plastic tables bolted to the floor, and the pale strip of a bulletin board. A bright blue RESTROOMS sign pointed down a side hall. He walked toward it at an unhurried pace. The asphalt underfoot was faintly gritty with sand. His breath puffed lightly in front of him, catching the orange light in soft bursts. Somewhere off to the right, out beyond the edge of the lamps, a single cricket rasped slowly, its sound dampened and strange in the fog. The glass doors opened on silent hydraulic arms as he approached. Warm air brushed his face and hands, carrying with it the smell of aging tile, disinfectant, stale candy, and coffee that had been sitting on heat too long. The interior lights were bright but somehow muted, humming in a high, constant note he only noticed when he tried to listen for something else. The floor was made of small square tiles in a speckled, no-nonsense pattern. The walls were painted a soft, institutional beige, darkened here and there by age and cleaning. To his left, a line of vending machines stood shoulder to shoulder along the wall. Their plastic fronts glowed, illuminating rows of chips and candy and soda. Devon stepped closer and squinted. The logos were off. There was a cola brand in a red can whose design he remembered from old commercials with fuzzy borders. The logo curved in a way it hadn't been in years. A row of candy bars bore wrappers he'd only seen in photographs, old fonts, old taglines. A couple of chips brands had bags with mascots that had been updated or retired a decade ago. The machines themselves were immaculate, no dust gathered in the corners, no half-peeled stickers. It all looked fresh, as if installed yesterday. Only the designs made them feel out of tune with his internal calendar. He moved on. At the back of the room, an information counter stretched along part of one wall. No one stood behind it. A small bell sat on its surface, the kind one might tap for service, but the idea of touching it sent a faint shiver across his skin. Beside the bell sat a coffee dispenser, an old, hulking thing with a glass pot half full of dark liquid that looked viscous under the fluorescent glare. A handwritten sign taped to it read, "Coffee 25 cents, honor system." A ceramic mug, chipped at the rim, waited beside it next to a glass jar holding a scatter of quarters. On the wall above the counter, the rest area map showed the state in pale green, highways traced in dull red and blue. A small star indicated "You are here." Devon leaned in to see where exactly here was. The star sat along a straight stretch of his route, right where the mile 312 rest area should have been. Instead of a numeric label, the little icon next to it read Blue Hollow in block letters. He watched the star for a long moment. It did not move, but his eyes kept wanting to track a slow drift, as if it were almost imperceptibly sliding along the line. A wall clock hung to his right, above a doorway marked RESTROMS. It was round, with a simple white face and black hands. Its second hand ticked. The time read 1:22 a.m. Devin checked his watch. It, too, read 1:22 a.m. The agreement was almost reassuring. He headed down the short hallway toward the restrooms. The change in acoustic was immediate. The hum of the main room's lights faded, replaced by a softer, more enclosed silence. The air cooled a degree or two, carrying a sharper scent of cleaner and tile grout. The men's room door swung open on a well-oiled hinge. Inside, the fluorescents were steady, without the faint flicker that so often haunted such places. Porcelain sinks gleamed under their light. The floor was dry. A subtle smell of soap clung around the basins. In the mirror above the sinks, his face looked paler than he expected, the overhead lights flattening the planes of his features. Behind his reflection, the doorway and the hall beyond sat empty, framed in white tile. He turned on a tap, splashed water on his face, feeling the sting of cold against his skin. Droplets clung to his beard stubble, catching the light in tiny prisms. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sensation chase away the lingering fog of fatigue. When he opened them, something on the mirror caught his attention. At first he thought it was just a streak from an imperfect cleaning, a faint drag of cloth that had left a mark in an otherwise clear surface. But as he leaned in, the strokes and curves resolved into letters. They were faint, as if someone had run a finger through steam and the trace had dried only partially away. In the upper corner of the glass, neat and small, were the words, "Watch the fog AT 327. His pulse gave a soft, involuntary jump. He stared at the writing at the almost dry edges of each line. It could have been left at any time, hours ago, days, weeks. Rest area staff missed things. People wrote messages, numbers, names. It happened. But the specificity of it, 327, he knew this road, knew, without checking, that mile 327 lay miles ahead, in a section where the interstate dipped a little closer to a low, marshy area. Fog collected there often, even on otherwise clear nights. He raised a hand and pressed his fingertips lightly against the letters. The glass was cool and unforgiving. No smudge came away on his skin. Behind him, a stall door creaked open. He turned. The stall at the far end of the row stood ajar, slowly settling from whatever minor shift had disturbed it. No. One emerged. The light remained steady, casting clean-edged shadows. All at once, he became aware that he had not heard anyone else enter. No footsteps, no cough, no rustle of clothing. The room felt occupied, just for a moment, by an absence shaped like someone unseen. He exhaled carefully, reminding himself of the simple rationalities of old buildings and old hinges and slight drafts. The fog outside could push air in strange ways. Doors moved. He dried his face on a rough paper towel, its texture scraping pleasantly at his skin, and left the restroom, letting the door swing shut behind him. In the main room, someone now sat at one of the plastic tables. The man was in his 50s, maybe, with a broad frame and a faded denim jacket. A trucker's cap shaded his eyes. An open thermos sat on the table beside a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. The faint smell of mustard reached Devin as he approached, thin and vivid. The man looked up as Devin passed. His expression was neutral but not unfriendly, the way of someone used to sharing space with strangers on the road. "You runnin' west?" the man asked, his voice low and oddly echoing in the mostly empty room. "Yeah," Devin said. "Fog's something else out there tonight." The man huffed a sound that might have been agreement. "Bad down in the low cut by the marsh," he said. Round 327, it likes to just sit. Saw more than a few folks get turned around in it over the years. Devin felt the words tick against the memory of the mirror. He studied the man's face, or what he could see of it under the cap. The features had a slightly softened quality, not blurred exactly, but like a photograph printed on matte paper. A faint sheen of fog clung to the shoulders of his jacket, as if he'd only just walked in. "You been through here a lot?" Devin asked. The man took a considerate bite of his sandwich, chewed slowly, swallowed. "Off and on," he said. "Long time, always liked this little place. It's quiet, easier to think somehow." Devin glanced around. The room was indeed easy in its emptiness. The hum of the lights seemed less intrusive now. The vending machines waited, their outdated offerings glowing patiently. The clock on the wall still read 1:22. "How long has it been here?" Devin said. "Blue Hollow. Don't remember seeing it on my map before." The man's mouth tugged at one corner, not quite a smile. "Depends who you ask," he said. "Some'll tell you it is." He gestured with his thermos toward the bulletin board on the far wall. "Maps can be funny that way." Devin followed the line of his gesture. The bulletin board was thick with overlapping notices, flyers, and travel advisories. Edges curled. Colors had faded differently. Some sun-faded to pale ghosts, others still sharp and new. He stepped closer, scanning. A flyer for a long-closed restaurant boasted new microwave menu. A weather advisory warned of a storm back in 1997. A lost dog notice with a tear-off number strip sat pinned over a faded announcement about road construction from 3 summers ago. Dates scattered without any apparent order. One small, yellowed scrap near the bottom edge caught his eye. It was no more than a torn corner of stationery, taped rather than pinned. In a rough scrawl, as if written in haste, it said, "If the fog gets too thick, come back." No name, no context, just the tape browned at the edges holding it in place. He straightened, suddenly aware of his own heartbeat again, the way it thumped, firm and regular, inside his chest. Behind him, the man at the table rose. His chair made a soft scraping sound on the tile. "Well," the man said, "better make miles while it's quiet." Devin turned to nod, but for a second he couldn't find the words. The room looked exactly the same, and yet felt subtly rearranged, as if an invisible curtain had been drawn a few inches one way or another. "Drive safe," he managed. The man touched the brim of his cap in a small, almost old-fashioned gesture. As he moved toward the door, Devin noticed the logo on his jacket, a trucking company name he had heard his father mention in stories, long since bought out and rebranded. The embroidery was bright, unworn by time. The glass doors opened for the man. Fog rolled in around his legs, curling briefly over the threshold like a living thing. Then he was gone, out into the orange-lit lot. Devin stood for a few more breaths, listening to the hum of the lights, the faint rush of air through vents. When he checked the wall clock again, the second hand had ticked forward. 1:23. He stepped out into the night. The lot seemed emptier than it had when he'd arrived. A few of the trucks he'd counted before were now gone. Whether they had left while he was inside or had never been there at all, he couldn't have said. The fog had shifted, too, lying thicker in some places, thinner in others, like a breathing thing. His own truck sat where he had left it. A fine skin of moisture clung to the windshield. The metal under his hand as he climbed up felt faintly colder, as if it had been left out a long time. Inside the cab, the air was cool and slightly stale. He closed the door and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, watching the rest area building through his side window. The windows still glowed. A shape, someone, maybe the man from the table, passed briefly behind the glass, then dissolved into the warm interior light. The fluorescent hum did not reach him here. The night wrapped the truck in a muted cocoon. He started the engine. The vibration under him felt reassuringly solid, the glow of the dash familiar. His watch read 1:23 a.m., so did the clock on the dash. He pulled out of the lot, following the arrows toward the on-ramp. At the edge of the rest area, a small brown sign gave a single piece of information in reflective letters. "Thank you for visiting Blue Hollow." The ramp arced up and around, meeting the main line in a smooth merge. As his truck's nose angled back onto the interstate, the fog closed in again, not abruptly, but with the confident ease of something that had been waiting. The world shrank to the cone of his headlights, the white lines sliding under his tires pulled taut and thin. His mirrors showed nothing but pale, swirling blankness. In that enclosed world, the memory of the mirror writing in the restroom took on a weightier shape. "Watch the fog AT 327. He set his cruise control a few miles lower than before, his foot hovering ready. Every part of him felt tuned, awake. The residue of drowsiness burned away by the quiet strangeness of the stop. Mile marker 320 appeared, its numbers damp and shining. Then 321. The land around the road dipped almost imperceptibly, the grade barely noticeable but present in the pull of the engine. By 325, the fog had thickened again. Beads of moisture speckled the windshield, caught and smeared by the wipers. The road noise shifted. The sound of tires changing as they crossed sections of slightly different pavement. At 327, the world outside his truck all but disappeared. His headlights met a smooth, luminous wall, visibility shrinking to an intimate, almost claustrophobic bubble. The dashed center line blurred. The edge line on his right was the only constant, the only sure thing. From somewhere ahead, faint and muffled, came the echo of a horn, a panicked bleat, cut short. Instinctively, he eased off the accelerator, fingers tightening on the wheel. A dim, diffuse red glow bloomed at the far edge of his vision, then was gone, swallowed by fog. Every cautionary tale he'd ever heard about pileups in low visibility flickered across his mind in quick succession. He dropped more speed, hazard lights on, creeping forward like someone feeling their way through a dark room, palms stretched out. For a long 10 seconds there was nothing, just fog and the hush of the night and the sound of his own breathing. Then the beams of his headlights found shapes on the shoulder, 2 cars, pulled hard over and angled sharply as if they had swerved in the same instant. Their hazard lights flashed, red and urgent, twin pairs of beating hearts. Figures stood a few feet away in the fog, backs to the road, talking close, their voices indistinguishable but high with adrenaline. Devon eased into the far lane, giving them as much room as he could. As he passed, one of the figures turned toward his truck, face drawn and pale in his lights. The man's expression went quickly from alarm to a kind of tenuous relief. Devon's window was up, but for a moment it felt as if their gazes met, his in the warm cab, the stranger out in the damp chill, both suspended in the thick silence. Then the truck's bulk carried him past. The people and their twin red flashing vans dropped back into his mirrors, then vanished into the white. He drove slowly for another mile, letting his heart settle, letting his mind adjust to the knowledge that whatever had happened there had been small enough, contained enough, to leave the road mostly clear. The fog began to thin beyond 329, drawn out into long bands that flowed across the asphalt like ghost rivers. Patches of sky appeared overhead, dark and depthless. A star showed through, then another. When he was finally clear of it, when the highway ahead opened up into a long, flat stretch with only a light, ordinary haze, he let his speed creep back up. His shoulders dropped a fraction from around his ears. Only then did he glance at the GPS. The little rest area marker had vanished. When he zoomed out, the map showed a long stretch of highway flanked by nothing but icons for exits to county roads. No services, no Blue Hollow. He slowed down enough to safely check the stay-tissued atlas he kept tucked in the seat pocket beside him. The pages showed the route as he knew it. At mile 312, There was a small, unlabeled rest icon. No name printed, no hollow of any color. He thought of the vending machines with their outdated but pristine designs, the immaculate tile, the analog clock ticking in perfect time, the man in the denim jacket with fog on his shoulders and a decades-old company patch that looked new. He pressed his thumb against the atlas where the little icon sat. The paper was cool and dry, unmoving. Somewhere behind him, somewhere in the fog or beyond it, a low brick building sat under sodium lights, vending machines humming, bulletin board heavy with layered paper. Its doors might be open or closed. Its clock might still read 1:22 for someone else. Or it might not be there at all. For the rest of the night, as the miles unwound under his wheels and the sky slowly lightened from black to deep blue at the edges, Devin found his thoughts circling back to the yellowed scrap of paper on the bulletin board. If the fog gets too thick, come back. He wondered, not for the first time, how many drivers had found their way there by accident. How many had seen their own cautions written in faint streaks on mirrors, or heard their own worries reflected in the voices of strangers at plastic tables. On future trips, whenever the forecast mentioned fog and his route took him past mile 312, Devin would find himself looking a little more closely at the signs. Sometimes there was nothing but the flat reassurance of the known landscape. Sometimes the mist lay low and harmless, and he drove on without incident. But every now and then, when the night folded in a particular way and the world lost some of its sharp edges, he would catch a glimpse, far ahead, of a soft orange glow bending the fog into a halo. A small, square sign by the roadside would whisper its name in reflective letters. And a quiet part of him would loosen at the thought of that room with its humming lights, its strange, timeless vending machines, and the mirror that remembered hands that had written in the steam. Story number 4. The valley held the fog like a bowl. From above, if anyone had been up there to see it, it would have looked like a long, pale river of cloud poured between two dark ranges, its surface smooth and unbroken. From inside it, where the highway threaded its careful path, it felt more like driving through the inside of a clouded glass bottle. Marisol's truck descended steadily into it, headlights pushing a hazy tunnel through the white. The gauges on her dash glowed in soft green arcs. A small ceramic charm of a blue swallow swung gently from the edge of the visor, catching the light each time the truck eased over a barely perceptible seam in the pavement. It was after midnight, that peculiar hour when the world thinned around the edges. The clock on the console read 12:43. The outside temperature hovered just above freezing. A thin rime of moisture had collected on the mirrors, blurring whatever lay beyond them into streaks of gray. She rolled her shoulders under her flannel-lined jacket, feeling the slow ache between her shoulder blades from too many hours keeping watch. The cab was warm, a dry, heater-scented pocket carved out of the damp cold pressing against the glass. Outside, the fog climbed higher up the windows with every minute. It muted the world into a soft, uniform glow. The faint orange of sodium vapor lamps at distant farm driveways was smeared into indistinct halos. The guardrail on her right appeared and vanished, silver, and then gone. The yellow line down the center of the road glowed like a floating thread. She flicked the wipers once. They whispered across the windshield, sweeping away a skin of beaded moisture that reformed almost immediately. The radio had been little more than company earlier in the night, cycling through stations that grew fainter as she passed each town's invisible border. Now, down in the valley where the fog lay thick and the hills rose on either side like dark shoulders, most of the frequencies returned nothing but a low, restless static. She turned the knob slowly, letting the dial creep across the FM band. Snatches of music surfaced and sank. A few bars of a love song wrapped in hiss, a chorus from a rock station stretched and warped, a fragment of late-night DJ banter swallowed mid-syllable. The AM side was worse. Long tracks of dry, crackling hiss, the occasional sharp pop of atmospheric interference, a distant voice blurred beyond recognition. Marisol's hand hovered over the knob, the pads of her fingers dry and slightly rough from a winter of cold steering wheels and fuel pump handles. She thought, for a moment, of switching it off and letting the engine's hum and the rush of tires on damp asphalt be her only soundtrack. Instead, habit nudged her on. Just one more turn, one more station. The dial rolled past 910 kHz, then 930, then 950. At 990, the static thinned. It didn't clear, not exactly. The interference remained, a soft, grainy bed. But beneath it, as if someone had turned down the volume on a crowded room, a voice emerged. Already deep in the fog, it was saying, clear and evenly paced. The valley was holding its breath again, and the sky had dropped down low enough that the stars were more memory than light. Marisol paused, fingers resting on the ridge of the knob. The voice was male, calm, with the slightly warm timbre of a practiced storyteller. It had no particular accent she could pick out, familiar in its very genericness. On the dashboard, the voice went on, the clock read 12:44. The swallow charm swung with every small imperfection in the road, tracing its quiet arcs in the dim glow. The blue charm moved, glinting. The console clock clicked over, digit segments reshuffling, 12:44. A slow prickle walked up the back of her neck, as if someone had opened a door to cooler air somewhere behind her. The cab remained sealed, glass clear, only the slick white world beyond it shifting. Coincidence, she thought, easy enough. Generalities. Lots of trucks on lots of roads after midnight, lots of dashboard trinkets and clocks. People liked stories about the road. But the way the voice had said swallow, the exact bird on the string near her visor, dug a small, insistent hook into her attention. She'd been on this run long enough to know the valley's moods, the voice continued mildly. Long enough to recognize the way the fog rose from the river below and laid itself over the asphalt like a long, patient hand. The hair on her arms lifted beneath her sleeves. The valley did have a river, somewhere off to the right, hidden. Now by the fog and the little stands of winter bare trees. She had never thought of it that way, as a patient hand. But as the voice said it, the image landed with the weight of something observed, not invented. Marisol glanced at the frequency indicator. 990. No station ID had stuttered between sentences. No music bed, just the voice, the static, and the low murmur of her own engine. She reached for the coffee at her elbow without taking her eyes off the road, the voice said. Her hand, already halfway to the travel mug, froze. The thermos sat where she always kept it, wedged into the molded cup holder, its metal scratched and matte. The smell of the dark roast inside ghosted up from under the lid, a faint, bitter warmth. She drew her hand back deliberately, fingers curling once, then resting loosely on her thigh. For a moment, the voice continued, she stopped, the back of her neck prickling as if she had forgotten something important. The fog beyond the glass pressed closer, listening. The cab seemed to shrink by a fraction, the familiar confines of the space taking on the intimacy of a room in which someone had just spoken her name. Marisol swallowed. Her throat felt a little dry, despite the coffee she hadn't yet drunk. Outside, the voice said, somewhere beyond the circle of her headlights, a sign waited in the dark. It was the sort she'd seen 100 times before on 100 different roads, but tonight when it appeared, she would read it twice. Ahead, the tunnel of light that was her world curved gently. Her fingers came back up to the wheel, skin squeaking faintly on the smooth leather. The sign stepped out of the fog as if on cue. Green reflective board, white letters, its post ghostly with condensed moisture. RIVRB&D Valley, 12 miles, fog area, use caution. She had seen that sign on every trip through this stretch. It was nothing new, and yet she did in fact read it twice, eyes moving over the words, then back again, aligning herself to the known. Her lips parted, drawing in a deeper breath than usual. On the radio, the narrator's voice was quiet, almost companionable. The sign matched the one in her memory, and that was a small comfort. Sometimes things did, not all at once, not in every direction, but enough. She hesitated, then reached for the volume knob, turning it up a fraction. The static sharpened, then leveled under the words. The fog could play tricks, the voice said. Anyone who worked these roads knew that. The way it thinned and thickened, the way it turned ordinary distances into elastic things. Sound behaved differently inside it. Time, too, if a driver wasn't careful. The phrasing slid too neatly against her own thoughts from the last hour. She had been mulling over that very slipperiness. The way minutes seemed to stretch between mile markers, despite the consistency of her speed. "This is ridiculous," she muttered aloud, if only to hear her own voice. It sounded solid enough, a little rough around the edges from coffee and silence. "Ridiculous," the voice agreed without a beat's delay. That's what she told herself, too, that it had been a long day, that she was hearing patterns in the static, that of all the trucks on all the roads, this station would surely not be speaking about hers. The wheel was steady under her hands. The truck moved smooth and obedient in its lane. The white line ghosted under the bumper, one short dash at a time. Her heart, however, had picked up its rhythm, a beat or two faster than she liked, pressing lightly against her ribs. She reached for the CB mic, more out of instinct than intent, fingers curling around the worn plastic. "Any westbound in the valley picking up this story station," she said, thumb hovering over the transmit button. She didn't press it. She imagined, in the space before she could, the voice on 990 sliding smoothly on. And then, of course, she reached for the mic, hand trembling just a little, wondering if admitting it aloud would make it more real. Her thumb left the button untouched. The mic dropped back into its cradle with a soft clack. Her hands returned to the wheel. "Some things," the radio voice said, "felt safer left between the fog and the cab, at least for now." A thin, wry thread had crept into the tone, not mocking precisely, but knowing. She tried the power knob. The radio clicked, a small pop. The voice did not stop. "The trick with a fog like this," it went on, as if discussing the weather with someone at a diner counter, "was not to let imagination get ahead of the tires, not to start seeing things that weren't there or missing the things that were, like the elk, for instance." Marisol's foot eased instinctively toward the brake. Elk. The valley was known for them. Great, heavy animals that sometimes wandered down from the higher slopes to graze at the margins of the road. The herd that sometimes drifted across this very stretch, the narrator said, between mile marker 214 and the small gravel cutoff on the right. On clear nights, they were easy to spot in time. In fog like this, they were just another part of the white until they were. Her eyes flicked to the odometer, then the small, reflective marker at the roadside as it glowed into view. 213. Her fingers tightened on the wheel. This, she told herself, was the sort of thing an old-timer on a local AM show might say. General warnings. Story wrapped around a safety tip. Maybe she had found some late-night regional broadcast she'd never hit before. Of course, the voice added mildly, she usually went through here at 60. Tonight she dropped to 58, then 52. Now it would be wise to ease it down just a little further. The pedal under her right foot suddenly felt less like part of a machine and more like a hinge in a story. She imagined roaring ahead, proving the station wrong, plowing through white emptiness, finding no elk at all, only pavement and the smell of damp earth. She pictured simultaneously the shape of a shoulder too late to swerve around, the thunk of contact, the sudden, sick slide. Without quite deciding to, she reduced pressure on the accelerator. The truck responded with its usual grace, obedience wrapped in steel and diesel. The speedometer's needle fell to 45. Mile marker 214 appeared on the right. Her breath seemed loud in the cab. Even when she argued with it, the voice said, some thin, stubborn part of her listened, because listening in this job had always mattered more than pride. The cutoff to the right was just ahead, a narrow slice of gravel leading into the fog, used occasionally by road crews or fishermen when the river ran lower. Tonight, it was barely a suggestion, a darker smudge beyond the shoulder. The elk stepped out of the white 3 seconds later. There were 4 of them, tall and spectral, their bodies half dissolved by the fog. Their coats glistened darkly with moisture. Their eyes flashed briefly in her headlights, eerie coins in elongated faces. They moved unhurriedly, not in a panicked run but a calm, heavy walk across both lanes, as if they owned every inch of the valley floor. At 60, she would have had no time to do more than brace. At 45, with her foot already easing down, she had space. Her hazard lights clicked on under her hand with practiced speed. She brought the truck down, slow and controlled until it crept, barely moving. The engine idled in a low, steady murmur. The elk passed in front of her hood, each hooffall soundless on the damp asphalt. Their breath steamed in faint plumes. Their flanks shifted under thick pelts, muscles rolling. For a suspended heartbeat, the cab and the animals and the fog were all part of the same held breath the valley had been keeping. The last of them disappeared into the white on the left. The road was empty again. On 990, the narrator did not say "I told you so." Heads dipped, the voice said softly instead. Steam curled and faded, and the truck, patient and humming, waited to be asked to move again. Marisol let her own breath out slowly. Her hand clicked off the hazards. Her foot found the accelerator with new, measured care. The road resumed under her, the white line back to its endless, subdued blink. She didn't know whether to feel reassured or more unnerved. Something had warned her. It had been right. But the precision of that warning, its timing and specificity, made the interior of the cab feel very small indeed. The valley went on. The narrator spoke of small things for a while, the way fog erased the sense of speed, the way the river kept a low, steady whisper somewhere off to the right, the way another driver, years ago, had missed an exit in conditions like these and found himself an hour down the wrong road before realizing the mistake. The stories braided with her own progress. A car appeared ahead, its taillights 2 soft red coins in the mist, and the voice mentioned the brief reassurance of company before the darkness widened again. The car turned off at the next junction and vanished into the milk. Marisol tried the power knob once more. The radio clicked. The little orange indicator light went dark. The voice did not falter. She reached for the radio without quite realizing she was doing it. It said quietly, hopping, if she was honest, that the absence of a light might mean an absence of attention. But the valley was a long way from empty. The static remained at the edges, like wind against a window. If she wanted, she could test it, the narrator offered. She could flip on her high beams even though she knew better, or tap the brakes twice, or say her name out loud. They were all small things, but they would feel like lines drawn on thin ice. Her fingers rested resolutely on the wheel. She left the high beams where they were. She kept her foot steady. The silence in the cab became almost tangible, a third presence with weight and edges. Instead, the voice said, she chose not to tug at the thread, not yet. The road curved slightly left, then right. Mile markers slid past, single digits ticking higher. Out beyond the glass, the fog shifted in subtle ways. It thinned for a breath, letting the silhouettes of trees stand briefly like tall, dark ribs along the shoulder, then thickened again until even the guardrail was lost. The real test, the voice went on, would come a little farther in, past the small turnout where she sometimes stopped on clear mornings to watch the sunrise burn the mist off the river. past the hollow where the air was always colder, even in summer. She knew the place. Locals called it Frost Dip, a shallow sag in the land where cold air settled and black ice liked to form in deceptive, paper-thin sheets. She had crossed it in July and still seen her breath there once. In fog like this, the narrator said, the difference would be harder to see. The shine on the road would look the same, but traction, like time, could change without asking. Her hands moved, almost of their own accord, to a slightly firmer grip. She could feel, through the subtle feedback of the wheel, the texture of the asphalt changing. Microscopic shifts communicated up through tons of metal. What would happen, the voice posed, if she ignored it? If she took the dip at her usual speed? Maybe nothing. Maybe the tires would hold, loyal as ever. Or maybe there would be that half-second of betrayal, hard to recover from in the best of conditions, harder still when the world outside was just a suggestion of space. She thought of the elk, of their silent passage, of the way the fog seemed to muffle even memory. Or, the narrator continued, softer now, she could simply take it slower. An extra 10 minutes borrowed from the night. The logbook would not complain. The delivery window had enough give. There was room here to choose the smaller risk. She frowned slightly, but the corners of her mouth tugged, despite herself, toward a wry curve. If whatever this was wanted to spook her, it was taking a roundabout path. 40-38. The speedometer obeyed without argument. Frost Dip announced itself not by sight, not in this whiteness, but by feel. A faint settling in her stomach as the truck's heavy body rolled onto a nearly imperceptible downward slope. The air in the cab cooled, her inhalation suddenly crisp. The fog outside seemed just a little denser, as if exhaled from the earth itself. Her tires rolled over the hidden slick with a soft, unmistakable sensation, a subtle momentary smoothing, as if the road had been greased. Even at the reduced speed, the truck murmured a faint protest, a ghost of a sway. Then the texture changed back. The sag passed. The valley floor rose minutely under her wheels. The chill in the cab eased its edge. On 990, the narrator let a beat of silence stretch, respectful. "Well done," the voice said then, not to her, but into some neutral space the two of them shared. Small choices. That's what the night was made of. Small choices stacked up until morning. The fog began to thin. It didn't vanish all at once. It drew back by inches, retreating from the glass, unfurling veins of darker air between its layers. The reflection of her own face grew clearer in the windshield. Eyes a little wide, mouth pressed into a line she smoothed consciously. Above, bits of sky appeared, first as a darker indistinctness, then with a hint of stars showing through, blurred points of silver. The valley didn't hold her forever, the broadcaster said. It was never meant to. It just asked for her attention while she was within its span, and attention tonight had been enough. The river, still hidden beneath the fog's surface, whispered on. As the minutes ticked into the high 40s, the white finally broke. 1 second her headlights were painting fog. The next, they were reaching out into a clear, open stretch of road. The contrast was almost shocking, like stepping from a dim room into noon. She blinked against the sudden reach of her own lights. The guardrails on either side gleamed sharp. The trees rose in dark ranks, their bare branches etched like ink strokes against a deep sky. Behind her in the mirrors, the fog lay like a low wall across the valley, a soft barrier between where she'd been and where she was now. She glanced at the dash clock, 12:59 a.m. On the radio, the voice gentled, as if stepping back. Outside the bowl of the valley, it said, the night felt different, larger, the danger less intimate, more diffuse. Other kinds of fatigue waited out there, other stretches of road where nothing seemed to happen at all. But here, in this brief run through cloud, she had been seen, and guided perhaps whether she wanted to be or not. Marisol's hand found the radio knob again. The little orange light was still off. The plastic felt room temperature under her fingertips. The voice, very faintly now, added, "Not every driver heard it. Not every night called for it. But for the ones who tuned in, for the ones already listening, there was sometimes a story that matched their wheels mile for mile." The static thickened. The words thinned, like someone walking away down a gravel path. She turned the knob. This time, when the switch clicked, there was only silence. Then the ordinary wash of static, indifferent and anonymous. A blast of music from a different station surged in as she spun the dial past 990. A bright, jangly pop song that felt almost offensively ordinary. She let it play for a while, more for the reassurance than the melody. The road ahead climbed out of the valley, bending gently toward a horizon she couldn't yet see. The fog stayed behind, pooled where the land dipped, content in its own patient way. Hours later, at a diner bright with fluorescent light and the clink of dishes, she would mention, cautiously, a strange broadcast to the woman behind the counter. The woman would frown, shake her head, and say the valley killed reception more often than not. There weren't any stations on 990 this far out, far as she knew. A man in a corner booth, his plate half empty, would look up at that and squint, as if trying to remember something just out of reach. "I heard a story thing once," he might say slowly. "Driving nights years back, thought it was a dream, to be honest, felt like it was talking about me." He'd chuckle then to take the edge off his own memory. Weird what fatigue does, probably just some late-night show. Probably. Out in the parking lot afterward, as she climbed back into her truck, Marisol would glance down at the radio without meaning to. The frequency display would show some ordinary station number, playing some ordinary commercial about windshield wipers or insurance. The night would be clear, no fog in sight, the valley behind her a dark suggestion between hills. But the next time the forecast called for ground fog there, and the temperature dipped just so, and the river exhaled its long, low breath into the bowl of land, she would remember the feel of the wheel under her hands and the sound of a calm voice telling her what she already half knew. And somewhere, perhaps, between hills and low-hanging cloud, between static and silence, a transmitter would hum to life just long enough to speak to whoever happened to be listening, and to whoever, alone in the fog, needed a story that matched their drive. Story number 5. By the time the highway slipped into the lowlands, the night had become a world of soft, shifting white. From a distance, if anyone had been watching, the interstate might have looked like a dark ribbon laid through a shallow, glowing lake. The fog clung to the ground at first, then climbed, drawn up by the faint warmth of engines and the slow exhale of the wet earth. It thickened until the line between sky and field and road blurred into softness. Noah's truck moved through it like a slow ship, headlights carving a hazy corridor ahead. The big Kenworth's engine rumbled steadily under his boots, a familiar, comforting presence. Dashboard lights cast the cab in muted greens and blues. The faint tick of the turn signal indicator, off for now, waited like a heartbeat he could call up at will. The clock on the dash read 2:08 a.m. Noah flexed his fingers on the wheel, feeling the slight stiffness in his knuckles. He'd been driving long enough that his body knew how to hold tension without complaint. Still, on nights like this, where the world outside became a featureless tube of pale gray, the strain gathered quietly behind his eyes. His thermos sat in the cup holder, half full of coffee that had begun to cool from hot to merely warm. The scent of it threaded the cab, mixing with the familiar notes of diesel, fabric, old paper, and a faint hint of pine from the aging air freshener clipped to a vent. Outside, the fog hugged the shoulders of the highway. The right-hand edge line glowed a steady white. The dashed center line appeared and vanished, a rhythm that could hypnotize if a person let it. Beyond the reach of the beams, darkness pressed in. Fields, low drainage ditches, the occasional line of trees vanishing into the milk. He knew this stretch of road. The lowlands here were a kind of basin for weather, Fog gathered where the river wandered lazily through reeds and shallow pools. On summer mornings, sunlight burned it away quickly. In late autumn nights like this one, it settled in and stayed until dawn. The GPS mounted to the dash showed his progress as an animated dot moving along a blue line, a pale suggestion of a river curved parallel to the highway. There were no exits for several miles, just long, flat nothing. He cycled through stations on the radio. Static met him at one turn, then the indistinct hum of a talk show fading in and out, then a music station so buried in interference the melody was more suggestion than sound. He let the knob go, leaving it between stations. The low, even hiss of static became another layer of white noise, softening the silence without distracting him. For a while, there was only the road, the fog, and the care with which he kept his rig between the lines. Then he saw the tail lights. They appeared as two dull red smudges at the very edge of his limited vision, floating at a fixed height above the road. For a second, he thought they were reflections of his own lights in some low cloud or road sign, a trick of moisture and angle. But as the seconds passed, they remained, glowing steadily, pulsing faintly as if there were a vehicle ahead, another truck perhaps or a car, moving just at the edge of his reach. He eased his foot off the accelerator a hair, letting the truck drop a couple of miles per hour. The taillights held their distance, neither growing closer nor slipping away. It was a small comfort seeing another traveler. The loneliness of the road could hit hardest in thick fog, when even the suggestion of other lives, other engines, other sets of eyes looking into the same shifting white, was something to lean on. The CB sat quiet in its cradle, a dark little box with its mic curled on a hook. He could have keyed up and called for a westbound in the lowlands, asked if anyone else saw what he saw. But habit and the softness of the hour kept him silent. He watched the taillights instead. They seemed to drift a little when the road curved. When he followed the bend of the lane, they moved with it, banking left and right in delicate arcs. Their glow was soft, a deeper red than most modern LEDs, more like old filament bulbs under glass. He turned the radio knob without looking, just to have something to do with his hand. The static wavered, thinned, then thickened again. Under it, for a moment, he thought he heard laughter, distant, quick, then a clipped series of words. Clear at 183, stay in the right lane, watch the merge. He paused with his fingers on the knob. Copy that, Ghost Rider, right lane through the fog. We got you. A second voice answered, faint but distinct, like a channel half caught. Noah's thumb slipped away. The radio dial settled on that spot, the right combination of frequency and atmospheric quirk, allowing the conversation to seep through the hiss. Next up's the low bridge at 186, another voice chimed in. Stacked up last week with that four-wheeler who couldn't see where he was going. Fog's a blanket tonight, boys. There was an easy camaraderie in the tones, the loose, practiced chatter of drivers who knew one another's handles, who had shared roads and routes for years. Noah glanced at the mile marker as it flashed by on the right, 182. The number sparked recognition. The low bridge at 186 was a known pinch point, an old overpass that dipped a little lower than modern standards, with a slight grade leading into it. On clear nights, it was nothing. In fog, it could feel like a stone ceiling appearing from nowhere. He sat up a little straighter, more alert. Ghost Rider, you still seeing that white K-dub behind you? One of the voices on the radio asked, light and conversational. Yeah, the first voice replied. He's back there, keeping his distance, smart in this soup. Noah's truck was white, a Kenworth. The word soup felt appropriate. The fog outside had that thickness now, that sense of being a substance more than a condition. Something in his chest gave a small, involuntary lurch. Handles were common out here. White Kenworths were not rare. Ghost Rider could have been talking about any number of rigs, any number of drivers in any number of fog-shrouded valleys. It was just coincidence. That's what he told himself. The taillights ahead glowed steadily, their distance unchanged. He brought his hand slowly to the CB mic, fingers closing around it until the plastic warmed under his grip. He raised it an inch off the hook, thumb near the transmit button. "Any westbound convoy talking? Low bridge at 186, this is." He stopped. On the radio, over the static, a voice said calmly, and that's about when he reaches for his mic, thinking maybe he ought to say something. His thumb hovered over the button. "He's careful, though," another voice added, dry amusement threading through the words. "Always has been. Doesn't like to step into a conversation blind." "No sense in spooking. A man more than he already is," Ghost Rider said, a note of something gentle in his tone. Noah let his thumb slip off the transmit switch. The mic hung in the air a moment longer, then he eased it back into its cradle without the soft clack it usually made, lowering it like something fragile. The cab felt very quiet, despite the murmur of the engine, the whisper of tires on damp asphalt, the steady wash of radio static. The taillights remained ahead. He checked his mirrors out of habit. In the side glass, the fog glowed softly in his own headlights' spill. For a second, he thought he saw another set of taillights far behind, red pinpricks mirroring the ones in front. When he blinked, they were gone, or simply lost in the haze. "Low bridge common up," said yet another voice on 19. "Watch your stack, keep it centered. White Kenworth, you're good on height, watch your right shoulder." Noah's hands tightened on the wheel. He had never given his position over the air tonight. He hadn't spoken his handle since leaving the last truck stop. His clearance was fine. He knew his rig's dimensions down to the inch. But the specific mention, the casual certainty, made his skin feel one size too small. The road grade shifted beneath him, barely perceptible but undeniable. The faint sensation of descending into something. The fog thickened, plastering itself closer to the windshield, moving like slow breath. Then the dark curve of the low bridge's underbelly appeared ahead, its concrete face emerging from the whiteness, damp and somber. Yellow clearance signs glowed on either side, black numbers blurred around the edges by moisture. The taillights in front slipped under first. Noah followed, centering his lane instinctively, the bulk of the structure passing over the cab with a close, muffled presence. For a moment, the fog was replaced by gray concrete directly above him, water beading and dripping in slow, heavy drops. He emerged on the far side. The bridge receded behind him, its shadow swallowed by fog. "Clear on the other side," Ghost Rider's voice said over the CB. "Everybody through, everybody good. White K-Dub, how's the heart rate?" Laughter crackled, soft and easy in the background. Noah did not answer. He drove. For a few miles, the convoy, a vague word he gave to these disembodied voices and the taillights ahead, chattered among themselves. They spoke of long-ago storms, of odd loads, of diners that no longer existed except in memory. The tone was mellow, threading nostalgia through practical tips about the road. "Fog'll thin out a bit around the loop," one said. "Always does. Air moves different near that river bend." "Right," another replied. "Then thick again round the marsh at 194. Watch your right, White Ken. Deer like to stand just off the shoulder there, looking to step into somebody's life." Mile marker 190 flashed by. The fog did, in fact, thin slightly. Condensed moisture on the windshield took on a faint, uneven pattern like breath on glass. For a heartbeat, the silhouette of trees appeared, bare branches clasped like fingers, reaching up out of the murk, then vanished again as the white closed in. The loop was not marked on his GPS. The river bend was, a wider curve in the blue snake drawn across the mapping screen. The small discrepancies between the voices, terms, and his digital map gave the whole exchange a subtle, wavering quality, like dreaming of a familiar room that was not quite right. "Anybody hungry enough to take Loop Creek tonight?" someone asked, voice rolling in with the static. "Fog's thick. Nice to sit it out under the lanterns for a bit. No exits till 2:06 far as the book's concerned, a different voice countered. Not in this stretch. Books don't list everything, Ghost Rider said. White Kenworth's comment up on it now anyway. He'll see the sign. Noah scanned the margins of the road more intently, eyes straining beyond the pale tunnel his headlights carved. The sign appeared almost immediately, shouldering out of the fog on the right. Loop Creek Overlook, 1-2 mile. Trucks welcome. The reflective letters shone clean and bright. A little icon beneath them suggested a picnic table and a viewpoint. Above it, in smaller text, local access only, use caution in fog. Noah's brow creased. He knew this highway. He had run it in every season, in every mood. There was no Loop Creek Overlook. His GPS, however, chimed soft agreement. Rest area ahead, the synthetic voice murmured. Exit in 0.5 miles. On the screen, an icon had appeared. A small bed symbol, a turn-off line curling toward something labeled simply Loop Creek. Nice spot, one of the convoy voices said. Lights warm, good place to wait out the worst. You're running solo, aren't you, White Ken? Could do worse than some company when the road's this gone. He watched the next sign approach. Loop Creek Overlook, 1-4 mile. Trucks use second entrance. An arrow pointed ahead, its point crisp in the glow. His turn signal lever sat under his left fingers, familiar and ready. The idea of a pull-off, of space and stillness and perhaps other engines humming nearby, tugged at him with real weight. The fog had turned the world into a small, compressed place. Even the sound of his own tires had acquired an echo, as if the night were folding back on itself. Loop Creek's a one-way, Ghost Rider's voice added, conversational. You roll in, you roll around, you come back to the highway right where you left it. Real gentle, real easy, no sharp corners. You won't lose any time you weren't already lassoed to the fog. No one noticed something then about the taillights ahead. Every small motion he made, every minute adjustment to keep centered in the lane, seemed to have an echo in the way those lights bobbed and swayed. When he drifted a hair left, they did too. When he corrected, they corrected. He tested it just barely, nudging the wheel a fraction to the right. The tail lights, distant and small, tipped the same direction with the same subtlety. The back of his neck chilled. Not a full shiver, just a tightening, like the air had pressed cool fingers to his skin. He flicked his eyes to the mirrors again. For a heartbeat in the side mirror, he saw the faint suggestion of headlights far behind, pale circles swimming in the fog, aligned with the height and spacing of his own. They moved as he did, keeping perfect pace. When he squinted, the reflection resolved into nothing more than generalized glow. Mile marker 193 slid by. The sign after it announced, Loop Creek Overlook, exit now. Ahead, through the thick whiteness, he saw the faint outline of the ramp curve away to the right guardrail, a splay of reflective posts, the dark mouth of a road angling into deeper fog. His hand tightened around the wheel. Here we go, someone said on 19. Doors open, boys, White Kenworth still with us. He's with us, Ghost Rider answered. He's thinking about it. You take the right, trust me. Fog's weird on the mainland tonight, seen what it does if you stay. The GPS's map view adjusted, cheerful and unquestioning, highlighting the turn with a bright, insistent line. Turn right, the mechanical voice suggested calmly. Then continue straight. Noah thought of other nights, other fogs, of white-knuckled hours spent in this same valley with nothing but road and guesswork, wishing for any sign of reprieve, of the bone-deep tired that sometimes crept in mid-run. He also thought of the tiny misalignments, the way the taillights ahead felt like his own movements reflected, the way the voices had described his actions before he took them, the way an exit he'd never seen before had appeared on a route he knew as intimately as his own kitchen. His left thumb slid over the turn signal stalk. Nothing forced him to decide quickly. The ramp was long enough. He could wait until the last second, see if some instinct shouted louder than the rest. On the radio, the static swelled, then thinned, like the surf of invisible waves rolling up and receding. The voices wove through it. "Last week that fellow in the blue Freightliner came through here," someone said, soft and reminiscent. "Fog like this. Didn't see the loop, or pretended he didn't. Mainline just kept on. Never did catch sight of him again." "Don't start with that," another said, half chiding. "Man on his run. Don't need ghost stories." "What do you think we are?" the first voice replied, laughter tucked into the words. Ghost Rider cut in quieter. "Truth is, White Ken, loop'll treat you decent. You pull in, you park. Lights are soft. Time runs funny, but it runs with you, not against. You get back on the road when it feels right. Or you can keep doing what you've been doing. Drive straight on through the weird." It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded, if anything, like a sincere offer. The ramp came alongside, white lines splitting, one path ahead, one peeling away. Noah kept his hand steady. For a fraction of a second, the truck's mass seemed indecisive. The cab felt weightless, like it might tip toward the right, toward warmth and company and the known unknown. The wheel gave the barest suggestion of easing that way, as if nudged by someone else's hand. He held firm, muscles answering with a quiet, stubborn refusal. The rig glided past the divergence. The ramp dropped away on his right, swallowed quickly by fog. The main line stretched on, a straight, pale stripe through white. There was a pause on the CB. Static filled it, gentle and unhurried. "Ah," Ghost Rider said at last, tone unreadable. "He's a stubborn one." Someone chuckled low. "Always is that one." "Suit yourself, White Kenworth," another voice added, not unkindly. "We'll see you around." The taillights ahead, which had maintained their unchanging distance for miles, blinked once, both at once, like hazard lights tapped on and off in a brief farewell gesture. Then slowly they faded. They didn't vanish in a sudden dramatic blink. They simply grew dimmer, as if moving away at a speed he couldn't measure, until the fog swallowed their faint glow altogether. The road ahead returned to pure, anonymous whiteness. The CB hissed quietly. The voices thinned, then dissipated, like threads of smoke in moving air. "Convoy clear," murmured one last scrap of sound. "Enjoy the strange driver." Then the channel held nothing but the soft, restless noise of atmospheric interference. Noah drove on, alone again. The fog did, as promised, thicken around the marshy area near mile 194. The right shoulder turned into a suggestion rather than a line. Dark shapes, reeds, low shrubs, appeared and vanished at the edge of vision. No deer stepped out. No unseen ramp tugged at his wheels. The only guidance came from the white paint under his bumper and the numbers on the markers as they emerged like candle flames and dropped away. He kept expecting the convoy to speak again, for Ghost Rider to cut through the hiss with a wry remark, for the taillights to wink back into existence, reassuring or reproachful. The radio remained as it had been before he'd found them, just static, just the faint ghost of distant stations, too weak to resolve into anything more than tone. Gradually, the land began to rise. The river slid away to the right, losing its hold on the air. The fog thinned by imperceptible degrees until he could see the vague outline of trees, then fence posts, then, almost startlingly, the scatter of stars overhead. The dash clock read 2:47 a.m. He checked his odometer out of idle curiosity, thumb tracing the numbers without really thinking. The miles since entering the heaviest of the fog added up. No gaps, no sudden jumps. Time and distance had behaved themselves, at least on paper. Later, at a rest area miles beyond the lowlands, he parked among a modest row of other rigs and went inside. The fluorescent lights hummed. The coffee from the machine tasted burnt and familiar. A travel advisory bulletin on the wall mentioned patchy fog near the river, urged caution, offered no other strange footnotes. At a corner table, an older driver in a faded jacket and ball cap nursed a cup and watched the TV where a muted weather map flickered. When the conversation turned, as it often did, to rough stretches of road and odd nights, Noah found himself mentioning, carefully, the heavy fog by the river, the low bridge at 186, the odd sense of company. The older driver's eyes lifted from his cup, sharp for a moment under their half-hooded lids. "You hear him?" he asked. "On 19. Noah hesitated. The other man's face had that look of someone who'd thrown a line into a deep pool, not knowing what might tug it. "Heard some folks chatting," Noah said, keeping his tone casual. "Talked like they knew the road pretty well." The older driver huffed a soft breath. "Yeah," he said, "they do. Some say there's a bunch of 'em that run that stretch night after night, trucks that never quite made it out of the fog, or did and liked what was on the other side better." He shrugged as if to chase away his own words. "Stories, you know." "Loop Creek?" Noah asked, watching for recognition. The man's mouth twitched. "That's one of the names they give it." He glanced toward the window, where the night pressed gently against the glass. I figure some folks who disappear into their runs long enough, they start to hear their own echo. Call it what you like." In the parking lot, when Noah returned to his truck, the fog was no more than a thin sheen over the far fields, silver under the lights. The highway beyond ran straight and clear under a high, dark sky. He climbed into the cab, closed the door with its familiar weight, and sat a moment before starting the engine. The radio was dark, silent. When he turned it on, it came alive with a country song halfway through its second verse, grounded and ordinary. He flipped to channel 19 on the CB. A couple of distant voices traded mileage and weather. No one mentioned low bridges or unseen overlooks. Yet on future nights, when the forecast called for ground fog in the lowlands and his route took him near the river valley, Noah would find himself listening more carefully to the static between stations, watching the fog ahead for the soft bloom of unseen taillights, feeling, in the small shifts of his steering wheel, for any gentle tug that wasn't entirely his own. And somewhere, perhaps, when the fog was just the right thickness and the hour had that hollow sound to it, a quiet convoy would roll through its endless loop by the river, talking among themselves about the drivers they'd seen and the ones they'd almost convinced to take the softer road. Whether they were echoes of the living, ghosts of the lost, or simply imagination given voice by weather and fatigue, the effect was the same. For a little while in the thickest part of the night, a driver who thought he was alone might glimpse two small red lights ahead and hear someone in the static say, almost fondly, "Easy now, White Kenworth. Fog's strange here. You're not the only one in it." Story number 6. The causeway felt less like a road, and more like a line someone had drawn across water and fog, daring the world to erase it. It ran for miles over the tidal flats, a long, elevated ribbon of concrete with nothing on either side but the suggestion of dark water and marsh grass somewhere below. In daylight. On a clear day, the view could be spectacular. Wide sky, silver channels of water, birds lifting in clouds from the reeds. At just past 2 in the morning, with sea fog rolling in heavy and low, it was something else entirely. Harper's truck moved along its center like a solitary lantern on a wire. The Kenworth's headlights pushed a tight cone of light through the whiteness, revealing only a few truck lengths of damp, gray pavement. The rest of the world dissolved into a soft, uniform glow. Sodium vapor lamps spaced along the causeway's edge cast hazy halos, their poles vanishing upward into blankness. To the left, where a low barrier separated the road from the drop, there was only a suggestion of depth beyond. To the right, a higher wall of pale concrete rose above the shoulder, a noise barrier, added when the causeway had been widened a few years back. Tonight that wall gleamed. A series of glass-faced panels had been affixed to it, reflective surface stretching in intermittent sections along the right side of the road. In the fog-softened light, They looked like long, vertical strips of mirror, each catching and throwing back fragments of Harper's own headlights. From the cab, the effect was strange. In the corner of her vision, a ghostly version of her truck rode alongside her in jittery segments, cut up and reassembled by the gaps between the panels. The reflected rig glided through the vapor, its lights a double echo, its outline softened and pale. The dash clock read 2:17 a.m. Harper shifted in her seat, rolling one shoulder to ease a knot that had gathered there over the last few hours. The cab was a small island of warmth around her, heated air humming softly through the vents, the smell of coffee and upholstery, and a faint trace of lemon from the cleaning wipes she kept stashed behind the seat. A string of tiny white LEDs ran along the edge of the bunk behind her, turned off now but ready to bathe the cab in a warmer, homier light when she finally shut down. She knew this run. Coastal Hall westbound, across the flats to the distribution center beyond the far shore. The causeway was the only direct route for heavy rigs. Signs at either end warned of high winds and advised caution in fog. Harper had read them without much thought on clear nights. Tonight, they sat in the back of her mind with a little more weight. The wind had picked up over the last 10 miles. She could feel it as a persistent, sideways push against the broad flank of the trailer, a hand sliding along steel. Nothing alarming yet, just enough to make her keep a steady touch on the wheel, to correct in small, constant ways. She took a sip from her travel mug, the coffee inside now lukewarm but still a comfort. The taste was familiar, bitter, slightly burnt, threaded with the metallic tang of stainless steel. The smell curled into her nose and settled there, grounding. Outside, the fog thickened. It didn't roll in dramatically. Instead, it accumulated, laying itself over the road and the guardrails and the distant water in slow, patient layers. The beams of her headlights shortened another truck length. The halos around the lamps on their tall poles grew larger, their cores fuzzier. The sound of the tires on the wet concrete seemed to change too, taking on a slightly hollow, enclosed quality, as if the fog itself were leaning in. The reflective panels along the right-hand wall came into clearer view, their glass faces beaded with moisture. In them, her truck's twin glowed. Headlights, marker lights, the glint of chrome on the grille. Each panel showed only a slice at a time, but together in motion, they knit into a kind of broken mirror image keeping pace with her. For a while, she let the sight of that other truck be a small reassurance. It was something to look at besides the repetitive rhythm of lane markings vanishing under her bumper. Then she noticed the delay. She eased the wheel a fraction left to stay centered between the faint white lines. A second and a half later in the glass, the reflected truck's nose ticked left too, just a hair behind the real motion. She tested it deliberately, a feather-light adjustment to the right. In the mirror-like wall, a heartbeat's pause, then the ghost truck followed, mimicking. Harper frowned, eyes flicking from the road ahead to the flickering segments of reflection and back. Reflections weren't supposed to lag. Even with fog and distance and the angled surfaces of the panels, the mismatch felt wrong. In the small way a familiar song played just out of sync with itself might feel wrong. "Just the angle," she murmured, though the explanation felt thin even as she spoke it into the quiet. The radio was on but turned low, tuned to a local station that had faded into gentle static a few miles back. The CB on Channel 19 sat silent, its indicator light a small, steady glow. The world beyond the cab had tightened into something intimate: truck, road, fog, wall. Ahead, an overhead sign appeared, its green face emerging from the white like something raised from underwater. The reflective letters caught her headlights. Title: FLATS Causeway, next 11 miles. CRSSWNDS possible. A second line glimmered briefly, half obscured by a veil of fog. Emergency pull-off, Bay 14 2 miles. Harper's finger tapped lightly on the wheel. Bay 14. She knew it. A widened shoulder cut into the right-hand barrier, barely big enough for a single truck. She'd never used it, On calm nights, it was just a bit of extra pavement, a marker she ticked off without thought. A place for a breakdown or a sudden necessary stop, not for the ordinary rhythm of her run. The Kenworth rode a bit higher on its springs as a crosswind pushed under the trailer. She corrected without drama. The wind eased, then pressed in again with slightly more insistence, like someone testing the strength of her grip. On the wall beside her, the reflection rode along, steady, making the same tiny, delayed corrections. Headlights cut two pale tunnels through fog in two worlds. As she passed the next overhead lamp, one of the panels caught more of her cab than usual. For a brief, held second, she saw her own face in the glass, pale hair pulled back, eyes narrowed in focus. The mirror Harper's expression matched hers, the set of her shoulders, the tilt of her head. Then, as her gaze snagged there, something in the timing slipped. She glanced back to the road, hands firm on the wheel. In the corner of her eye, the reflected Harper kept watching the place where her real eyes had been, a fraction of a second too long, as if their gazes had continued to meet even after she'd looked away. A chill walked, light and precise, across the back of her neck. She fought the urge to check again immediately. The fog ahead demanded her attention. The lane markings were faint under the shimmer of moisture. The center line, once crisp, had blurred into short, disconnected shadows at the very edge of visibility. A sign loomed quick and close, Bay 12, no SCRVICES. Concrete sloped away to the right in a brief swell of extra shoulder, unlit and ghostly. The high wall broke there, dropping to a lower barrier that exposed more of the fog-swallowed space beyond. In the glass-faced panels that followed, her reflection returned. Truck, lights, slice of cab. The delay in the mirror's response felt longer now. A second, too. The ghost truck's hazards flicked on for a heartbeat, then off, though she hadn't touched her own switch. Her hand hovered briefly over the panel. She could hear the faint tick of the real hazard relay in the quiet, waiting. She did not press it. The radio snapped into brief clarity. Crosswinds increasing on the flats, a distant voice said, warped by distance and interference. Gusts to 35 near Bay 14. Drivers advised to use caution and pull over if needed. Then static again, rolling back in like a soft, ragged wave. Harper flexed her fingers, one at a time, on the wheel. The coffee in her thermos had cooled to lukewarm. She left it where it was. Ahead, the fog brightened in patches where the overhead lights condensed into larger, overlapping halos. At the base of the next lamp pole, a small reflective sign glowed. Bay 13, 1 mile. The digits shimmered, streaked by slow, sliding beads of moisture. "Almost there," she murmured, voice low in the cab. Whether she meant the bay or the end of the heaviest fog, she couldn't have said. The wall to her right changed subtly. The sound-damping concrete between the reflective panels seemed darker, the seams more pronounced. In the glass, the ghost truck kept pace, but its details had shifted. Her own rig bore a scuffed company logo on the door, the bottom edge dinged years ago in a tight loading dock. The reflected door's logo looked cleaner, the scuff absent. On the dash in front of her, clipped to the air vent, a small paper note from dispatch fluttered faintly with each adjustment of the blower. "Call in from Bay 20 if conditions bad," it read in cramped writing. On the dash in the reflection, for the fraction of a second she could see it, the note looked the same paper, same handwriting, but the number was different. "Call in from Bay 14. She blinked hard. In the brief blur that followed, the panel slid past, taking the reflected cab with it. The next mirror panel showed only the side of the trailer, white and featureless, dirty streaks drawn out in candlelight lines. Bay 14 sign appeared, sudden and close. Bay 14 emergency pull-off, 1-2 mile. The arrow pointed to the right. Under it, in smaller letters, crosswind shelter. Another gust hit the truck as if in emphasis. The steering wheel tugged firmly under her hands. The trailer's bulk caught the wind like a sail. She corrected, eyes steady, jaw tightening a fraction. On the barrier wall, the reflection truck rocked, not subtly, but with a more dramatic tilt, as if, in that other strip of world, the wind had shoved harder or the lane were a fraction narrower. She watched, oddly detached, as the ghost rig's top edge leaned toward the left-hand drop, then righted. The motion-like footage played at slightly the wrong speed. Easy, she told herself out loud. Plenty of control, plenty of weight. Her load was heavy tonight, pallets of packaged goods stacked solidly from nose to tail. The extra mass gave her more purchase against the wind, more grip. Lighter rigs had more to fear here. Still, the shoulder widened ahead where Bay 14 carved a deeper notch into the right-hand wall. A concrete lip jutted out, curving protective arms of barrier around a long, narrow bay. Overhead, one of the lamps leaned in, bathing the space in an amber puddle of light. The fog there glowed gentler, churned less by the wind sweeping the exposed lanes. In the reflection, Bay 14 looked different. The mirrored version was crowded, 2, maybe 3 trucks tucked into the space, their hazard lights beating soft red in the fog. Shapes moved faintly between them, human outlines blurred by glass and mist. One of the reflected rigs looked like hers. Same profile, same colored cab. Its driver's door stood open a crack, a pale sliver in the gloom. Harper's own Bay 14 lay empty. Her foot hovered on the throttle, indecision a palpable thing in the small distance between rubber and pedal. The schedule ticked quietly in the back of her mind. Delivery window, hours of service, the little arithmetic of runs. The bay, inviting and bright, meant stopping early, eating into that cushion. The wind flexed its invisible muscles again, pressing harder this time. The truck responded with a subtle, unnerving sway. A low, humming moan rose briefly from the space under the trailer as air knifed through its undercarriage at an angle it hadn't expected. She felt the bridge under her in that moment, not as solid, unyielding concrete, but as a long thing resting on pillars above black water and soft mud. In the glass, the ghost Harper lifted a hand, just for a heartbeat, as if reaching toward the bay. Her mirrored hazards flickered on, little red jewels. Her lane position edged right, nose angling toward the shelter. Harper's own hand stayed centered, the wheel a firm, familiar circle. The truck slid past the entrance. The narrowed lanes beyond reached out, pale and exposed. Bay 14 dropped away behind her, swallowed by fog and distance. On the CB, a faint voice broke through, clipped and utilitarian. High-profile vehicles be advised, it said. Reported strong crosswinds on Tidal Flats Causeway between bays 14 and 16. Use extreme caution. Static washed back over the words, fraying them into noise. The next gust arrived less like a shove and more like a steady, insistent lean. The trailer pulled to the left, suspension creaking softly. Harper countered, muscles and training aligning without conscious thought. The truck held its line, but the effort tightened something deep in her shoulders. In the mirrors on the right, the reflective panels showed the ghost truck again, as if the earlier image of it turning had been overwritten. This version was farther over the lane line than she liked. Its top edge tipped a few degrees more than felt safe. The image jittered, like a video buffering on a weak connection. She drew a long breath, slow and deliberate. The coffee in her stomach felt heavier than it should. 2 miles to Bay 16, 4 to the causeway's midpoint, 11 to the far shore. Ahead, the wall to the right broke for an instant, opening onto a brief, unprotected span where the concrete dropped low and the barrier vanished into the fog. Through that gap, the night beyond looked larger, darker. The wind's voice was louder there, a low, constant roar. Harper's grip on the wheel firmed. Then up ahead in the white, a new sign materialized that she didn't expect. Bay 14B, Shelter LAYBY 14 mile. The lettering was narrower than the others, the board slightly smaller. It almost looked temporary, though the reflective surface gleamed as crisply as any permanent sign. Beneath the words was a simple symbol, a truck sheltered under a slanting line. She stared at it for the brief seconds she had, weighing everything at once. 14B, she had never heard of a 14B. The highway authorities didn't use letters out here, not in her experience. Bays were evenly spaced, numbered, predictable. The GPS, though, chimed. "Pull off ahead in 0.2 miles, the synthetic voice said calmly. "Recommended shelter zone." A small icon appeared on the map, a pale square off to the right of the blue line. Her heart thudded once hard. The wind, as if sensing her hesitation, chose that moment to gust sideways with sharper force. The truck shifted. The edge of the lane felt uncomfortably close under her right tire. For one brief, cold instant, she imagined a gust just slightly stronger, just slightly mistimed. Her turn signal clicked on before she'd fully decided. The sound tick, tick, tick was startling in the quiet. The amber indicator on the dash flashed in time, a small, insistent metronome. Up ahead through the opaque white, another break in the wall emerged, narrower than Bay 14 but real. A slit in the barrier, concrete flaring out into a snug recess barely long enough for one rig. It huddled under a heavier slab of overhanging concrete, a pocket of yellow-orange light pooled under a single lamp. Harper eased the Kenworth into it, feeling the brief weirdness of turning toward what had, for miles, been an unbroken wall. The wheels bumped over a seam in the pavement where Old Causeway met the newer patch. The bay wrapped around her truck as she settled in, its barriers close enough she could have touched them if she leaned far out the window. She set the brake. The satisfying hiss of air released into the tight, fog-muted space. The engine idled, then she shut it off. Silence, thick and immediate, dropped into the cab. The wind's howl dulled. Out in the open lanes, the air still moved with force. She could see it in the way the fog rushed past the mouth of the bay, in the horizontal streaks of moisture swirling at the height of passing traffic. Here, though, the concrete shelter blunted it, turned it into a low, distant murmur. Harper let both hands rest in her lap. The muscles in her forearms tingled faintly, as if they'd been holding more tension than she'd realized. For a moment she just breathed, feeling the close, protective weight of the structure around her. The cab seemed smaller but safer, like a child's fort built in the corner of a stormy room. She turned her head toward the right side window. The reflective panels along the causeway wall were still visible beyond the mouth of the bay, angled differently now. In them, the ghost truck rode on down the road without her, nose pointed into the white, trailer gliding steadfastly through the fog. Its tail lights glowed dull red, growing smaller by increments until the mist thinned them to nothing. In that other strip of world, whatever it was, the driver who'd chosen to stay with the mainline continued on. Somewhere down the invisible way, a gust might or might not catch it wrong. A choice might or might not hold. A stronger burst of wind hit them, slamming into the exposed lanes. Even in the shelter, Harper felt the bay shiver, the truck sway just a hair. Out beyond, the fog tore sideways, ripped into streamers, then closed in even more densely than before. She imagined, briefly, the sidewards weight of that air on a moving rig, the wheels fighting for grip, the split-second balance between upright and not. She sat in the quiet for several minutes, watching the fog's billows soften again, their violence spent. Her breathing matched the slower pace, rising and falling like the surf she couldn't see but knew lay somewhere out in the dark. When the gusts eased, when the movement of the mist smoothed back into a slow, even drift, she turned the key again. The Kenworth's engine rumbled to life, familiar and reassuring. The dash clock read 2:33 a.m. She checked her mirrors. Nothing but white and the faint glow of far-off lamps. No other trucks had joined her in the hidden bay. No ghostly rigs had appeared beside her. She eased out of the recess, the tires bumping gently over the seam back onto the main line. The wind met her still, but with less ferocity. The fog, somehow, had lost some of its hard, enclosing quality. It felt more like weather again and less like something with an opinion. The reflective panels alongside showed her true image now, matching her movements in real time. When she tipped the wheel, the reflected truck moved with her. No lag, no mismatch. The paper note on her dash read Bay 20 in both worlds. By the time she reached Bay 20 proper, the fog had thinned enough that she could see the faint gleam of water below and the black suggestion of marsh beyond. She pulled in as planned, made her call to dispatch, listened to the familiar rustle of paper and tap of keys on the other end. Wind dropped some, the night dispatcher said. They had a brief advisory out for the midsection, but it's canceled now. You good to keep rolling? Yeah, Harper said. She glanced at the causeway stretching ahead at the reflective wall at the now ordinary glass. I'm good. On the far shore, as she came off the long bridge, an electronic message board loomed over the road, its amber letters flashing in rotation. Earlier high winds. Drive with care. Remember shelter BAYS 1416. No one mentioned a 14B. At the distribution center, bleary-eyed but on time, she signed her papers and swapped brief jokes with the receiving clerk. In the small break room, another driver off a different run sat with his coffee, watching a muted news report of weather along the coast. They say a truck went over on that causeway last month, he mentioned absently, eyes on the screen. Didn't know the wind picked up again, I guess. You hear about that. Harper thought of the ghost rig in the panels, of Bay 14 crowded with hazards in the reflection, of the unseen path where she might have driven straight on. She thought of the way the wind had howled, just for a few minutes, ripping the fog sideways. Yeah, she said quietly, I heard. Out on the flats, the causeway waited under its lamps, sometimes shrouded in fog, sometimes laid bare under stars. Drivers crossed it at all hours, some on clear, uneventful nights, others through weather that made the world small and strange. The reflective panels along the wall watched them all, catching and returning their moving lights. Every so often, when fog and wind and hour aligned just so, someone crossing the midsection would catch a glimpse in that glass that didn't quite match. A lag, a leading image, a note altered on a scrap of paper, a version of their own truck making a choice a second ahead or a second behind. Not everyone noticed, not everyone listened. But for those who did, for the ones whose hands tightened on the wheel and whose eyes tracked the ghostly twin in the glass, the bays cut into the concrete seemed to glow a little warmer, their shelter a little deeper. And somewhere in the mingling of reflection and real, in the space between fog and glass, another set of headlights rolled steadfastly on through a version of the night where a different decision had been made. Their story carried forward, quiet and unseen, down a parallel strip of road.